My name is Judd Ehrlich. I'm a documentary filmmaker. The most recent feature film I made, is called The Price of Freedom, and it's about the NRA over time and their influence on gun culture in America, and really examines how we got to this point in America that so many people agree, gun owners and non-gun owners alike, is not a place that we want to be in this country. So that's what that film looks at. And I've made several other feature-length documentaries with the same partners. I made two films about youth sports in America. One called "We Could Be King," about rival football teams in Northwest Philadelphia who were forced to merge when there were a lot of school closures, and another one on the Akwesasne territory, which is on the New York Canada border, Ontario border, where we followed an all Mohawk um, female lacrosse team for the season there.
I love that you're able to, in your films, that it's not just about the lacrosse team and it's not just about guns and it's not just about football, that you're really getting into the deeper sociological factors that contribute to the major problems we have. One of the reasons I founded Build Up Boys is that I have two boys. One's 8 and one's 6. And when I sent my older son, when he first got to kindergarten and would do these lockdown drills and say to me, "Yeah, well, if a bad guy comes, we're going to go into this loft and we're going to hide." And anyone who has kids knows that it's impossible to keep kids quiet, right? So just imagining your child like trying to keep quiet in a classroom and like what that's doing to them and just how scared I am in general of gun violence and our mental health crisis and all of it. I was like, okay, well, I can't approach it that way, but what could I do starting really young? Like, what could I do starting really young that could maybe make a difference in terms of boys' lives, their emotional capacities, their ability to self regulate their emotions? And could that potentially proactively create a healthier mental health environment so that maybe it didn't need to come to this? I wanted to know what motivated you to make the film. What was your kind of overall takeaway? Um, yeah, we'll start there, and then I have a few more questions.
Yeah. Well, I think what you've said in terms of founding this organization to be more proactive is key. We live in an extraordinarily reactive country, and you know we can't address gun violence in this country through drills, through bulletproof backpacks, through these things that are clearly going to further traumatize our kids and have them live in fear. And any parent, anyone, parent or non parent, doesn't want to live in a society where they have to fear for their life when they go to school or go to their religious institution or go to the supermarket. Just live life. You don't want to live that way. So, in making this film, it was that question of how did we get to this point in this country? What went wrong? And I think, in terms of the organization that you run, the idea of firearms and this mythology around frontier masculinity are so intertwined. And I think we look at that in a number of different ways in the film. But I think to begin to unpack that and to understand it and also understand how race is intertwined in that, is one of the big projects of this country. And in raising the next generation, really understanding and getting to the roots of these problems, because we have a sizable population in this country who, when they feel that that frontier masculinity is threatened, there is going to be a reaction. And we look at the film um, the 1960s is sort of the beginning of that shift in the NRA. Um, and that was really when people began to realize that guns could be a really potent symbol to rally around and be part of this culture war in America. And that was also a time when, you know, urbanization, industrialization was happening. There was less hunting. They needed a reason to sell guns, and self-protection, was that reason. And so then you get into, again, that idea of frontier masculinity, men as the protector. And, through the course of the film, I think we trace how this becomes more and more extreme and how the NRA backs vigilantes and this idea of the good guy with the gun. And you, as a white man, are going to be better equipped to go out into the world than anyone else and not only defend your home, but defend other people's property, and act really as a one man army.
Yeah.
The one other thing I'll say that's unique about this country, and what you have to point to when you say, why do we have this problem in America, is the lack of legislation,
Yeah, it's
lack of
crazy.
any
Yeah.
legislation.
I mean, constitutional carry? Holy shit.
But of course, constitutional carry is a made up term
Yes.
that, you know, says really that the Constitution grants everyone the right to carry without a permit, without training. That's not the case. That's not true. That's not the natural state of being. And we talk about in the film, like many things in this country, the rights that were extended to folks at the founding were for white men. So the same is true of firearms, and many of the laws that were passed were racist gun laws from the very beginning. It was to keep
Totally.
guns out of the hands of Native Americans, out of slaves, and then freed slaves. And so, you know, that is still with us. And we look at the Mulford Act in the film, which ironically, at that time, the governor of California was Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan was saying at that time, we've got to pass some gun legislation. And why was that? Well, it would seem that the folks who were carrying the guns, which were the Black Panthers who were on the steps of the Capitol in Sacramento, those were not the folks that Ronald Reagan and the NRA, who drafted the law behind the scenes, wanted to see holding the gun.
The most shocking thing, I think, for me watching the film is how many people across blue and red states agreed that this is no way to live. And so I guess my question on that is, what did you want the audience to take away?
I think that people are going to take away different things for any film on any subject, but
Right.
absolutely, guns are a contentious, divisive issue in America. But I think more so they are painted that way, that there's no middle ground by groups like the NRA, because that serves their purpose. If
Right.
they say there's no common ground here, then we all throw up our hands and we say, well, why even legislate? Why even bother to work on this? Why bother to protest? Why bother to do anything? Because we're never going to agree on this. We're too far apart. My goal with a film like this, and any film, is that, no one shuts it off after 30 seconds, that you don't feel like you're being
You're like this baseline that someone watches, but
stick with me, watch it, I think that the reality is that guns are not going away in this country.
No,
They
they're
have a long history of firearms usage in this country. They're not going away. And um, there is nothing wrong with owning a gun. But if you own a gun, that is a huge, huge responsibility. It's this idea of stranger danger, this idea that somebody's going to break into your home, somebody's going to jump out of the bushes. It's not to say these things don't happen, but that fear of victimization plays into this narrative that there's going to be somebody who can save you, that you need to be fearful, you need a gun to protect yourself. That's the way to do it. And this adds to more guns in the home. But as we know, that's not the most common way these guns are used. It's more often than not violence against women, or it's going to be somebody that you know. It's going to be a partner or former partner. It's going to be a family member. It's going to be one of these things. So, again, these narratives are really, over time, by the NRA, by the gun industry, who really work together, have been fed to the American public for decades now. And it's just become part of the conversation and how we think about it, no matter what side of the issue you're on. And that was part of it too, sort of realizing how much we've all been gaslit by this messaging, very effective messaging of the NRA, about crime and victimization, what a gun can do, what a vigilante can do, all of these ideas that have just become a part of the American psyche. They really were able to harness those very deep myths of America and use them to their advantage and ultimately to sell more firearms. You know, guns have come to represent a lot of things and been imbued with a lot of meaning, with the help of groups like the NRA. So they've come to represent the instrument of this frontier masculinity, this rugged individualism, this how you can truly be a man in this country. Um, and you see that there's infamous ads from the Bushmaster assault rifle, that talk about get your man card reissued, and the way to do that is to buy an assault rifle. That's going to be the way to get something reissued. This man card, something that's been lost, your manhood back. Um, and that idea that an object, that a commodity, that something you can buy can actually make you a man. And when you really just think about that,
Right.
and you think about that, really, this is the Bushmasters' goal is to sell more guns and make more money. And they are playing on people's insecurities, people's myth making, all of these things to sell more product. And it's really been successful. This idea that you could buy something, and by buying that, you could be more of a man. And the the result is that you see in the numbers. I mean, you see who are the mass shooters, who are the people who are involved in gun violence, who are the victims of gun violence. This is not to say that there aren't other
Yeah.
victims of gun violence, but those numbers are so high for men and often white men in this country. And that is because of a combination of this sort of toxic brew of these ideas of masculinity, which have been furthered and promoted and amplified, combined with the fact that we have such lax gun laws in this country, and anyone can really get a gun. So when they want to get their man card, they can just go out there and get it. They can buy that assault rifle and they can do what they want with it.
And then power is associated with violence, like having power over, as opposed to like a lot of my curriculum is trying to empower boys to know themselves and feel their own power within so that they don't have to have power over, but power with.
I think you have to acknowledge that this country was founded on violence and genocide.
Right.
Genocide of Native Americans, the enslavement of Africans. This is how this country was built. And we're beginning to reckon with that as a country. But part of that frontier mythology and frontier masculinity is John Wayne on a horse or Ronald Reagan on a horse. And it glosses over the violence. It says that these are the good guys and that some of that shooting was okay and that this was what was needed to tame the West and to create this new country that we had. And these ideas of manifest destiny still are with us today. And so to detangle all of that, we're beginning to do it. And it's why I think it was so powerful to make this film during the uprisings of 2020, because those echoed the 60s and those echoed the both the uprising and the asserting of rights from traditionally marginalized groups, people of color, women rising up and saying, we're here and we deserve the promise of America like everybody else. But what you saw in the 60s and what you saw in 2020 and now is that when that uprising happens, there's a backlash on the other side. And that fear goes up because it's a threat. It's a threat to that mythology. And so you get a Kyle Rittenhouse who says, it's my job to leave my house, leave my state, and make sure that this Black Lives Matter protest doesn't get out of hand. And two people end up dying because of that. One of the reasons I think that David Keene was so interesting to me. So he is a former president of the NRA, a current board member. But beyond that, he's been really integral in conservative politics for over 4 decades. And that is so interesting to me because he's somebody who is really one of these people who's a little bit behind the scenes. You may have not heard his name before seeing this film, but you realize when he has the ear of Republican president after Republican president, that it's folks like David Keene who are somewhat orchestrating this culture war in America that's gotten so out of hand. And really, again, is at a very foundational level, um, dependent on these traditional gender roles. And, with somebody like Donald Trump, that was kind of the apex of all of these things. He really played to that. That's his shtick to have that macho image that plays to that idea. So it's all wrapped up in that, and I think to really begin to deconstruct that, America doesn't have a monopoly on misogyny or toxic masculinity. This
Right.
happens throughout the world, but the levels of gun violence are off the charts in America in it compared to other industrialized nations. The reason that I think that is, again, goes back to our gun laws and our lack of gun laws here. And I think as far as how we can take action and what can we do to be able to have something that is concrete, like having some type of gun legislation at a national level in this country with gun laws that we know can work. Red flag laws where there's agreement among all sides, background checks, all of these common sense gun laws, safe storage, all of these things that we can do something about
Yeah.
where there's agreement between gun owners, non-gun owners. We can do something about that, and we can work towards that. And it is really a minority on the other side, a very active gun rights, extreme minority that has just been very, very successful at defining this debate in the country and saying that there can be no agreement here and that the natural state of being is to have no gun regulation whatsoever.
Right.
And so,
Or the answer is teachers need to carry, right? That's the answer,
right, that the answer to everything is more guns,
which is great.
and that more guns are going to make us safer. And the research just doesn't bear that out. More
It does
guns
not.
make us less safe.
Listening to you is that you are a white man using your power with. Like, you are empowering others to tell their story, and it's not having power over them, but with, which is exactly what I feel like young boys need to learn. I mean, even when it comes to issues of consent, um, having a boy know that if he doesn't want to be hugged, he doesn't have to be hugged. So he develops body autonomy. And then from that body autonomy, then he understands someone else's body autonomy and like has that kind of respect. And again, that kind of feeling of empowered, um, that you're using your power to empower others. And I just think that that's such a shining example of real strength and beautiful masculinity. I don't know what adjective necessarily to call it, but more people need to do that. I mean, more men, especially more white men.
Yeah, right. And I mean, I think to understand, as you said, this is not a sign of weakness. I mean, what kind of a society do we want to live in? We want to. I want to live in a society that's a collective society where we help each other, where we look out for our neighbors.
Mhm.
And so often this idea of masculinity, which is really toxic, is one of total individualism that you don't need any and you hear it even in the language. I think about, you used to hear it a lot more, the nanny state, right? So this is sort of this feminization of helping, of government helping people, of lifting all boats. And this individualism kind of dovetails with this sort of radical conservative ideology that you just have to lift yourself up by your bootstraps and
Yeah,
just,
kill anyone in your way.
yeah.
Right.
And so it's a dangerous way to live. I don't think, and I think when you talk to most people about it, again, even if they are Republican gun owner from a rural environment, we have more in common than we know. Those folks, like folks from the big city, are parts of community, are look out for their neighbor, care about each other. These are values that Americans can agree on, that we can share. And when we see it get taken as we do in the price of freedom, to the point of, these so-called militias where folk, men are strapping AR-15s to their back and going to state capitals, that's not what most Americans want for this country or where we want to raise our kids. But that's the extension of this view. It's kind of where all things lead. And so we have to get back to another way of living, another way of talking to each other, another way of framing these discussions, whether they be about guns or other issues that we find divisive in this country, and understand that we all just want a better, safer, healthier environment for us and for our children. When you look at the words of, everyone is created equal. But how do we live up to the spirit of that? How do we create a society where people truly are equal, where people can truly live free in the best sense of that word, in the sense that others are not infringing upon our freedom, that we don't live in fear of firearms because everybody believes that it's their God-given right to own a fire. If you're a gun owner on the gun issue, gun owners have such an important role to play, because right now, the organization that represents you and speaks for you as a gun owner is the National Rifle Association. If you don't agree with their lobbying efforts and what they are about, maybe you want to find a organization of gun owners that believes in other things, and
Or
that
start
could
with,
really
right?
change
Yeah.
that could really change the conversation, and is starting to. Those organizations exist. Even Giffords is starting an organization for gun owners who believe in having some gun legislation.
Yeah.
So
Which is
those
huge.
conversations, I think, are happening, can happen, not only can happen, but have to happen.
Have
What
to.
other
Yeah.
choice do we have?
Yeah.
They have to happen. What can we agree on? Can we agree that we want to have happy, healthy kids? That's a starting point. And then let's talk about how we get there, and talk about maybe why we disagree about certain things there. But at least we find a foundation that we can agree upon to start to work off of. I think so often people come at conversations from the endpoint where we've already gone to our corners, and we've got all the baggage of all of the wrongs that have happened from the other side, and all of these ideas that this conversation can never work because you believe X, Y, and Z, and the other person is thinking the exact same thing about you. So I would say, search for those commonalities as much as you can. Look inward and try to examine yourself, and try to think about what you want, and what you want for yourself, for your family, for your community, and for your country. And hopefully, when you start to delve into those issues, that'll take us all in a direction that will arc towards justice.